Salford, Manchester, January 1953. 7 mouths to feed, 11 shillings and fourpence until Friday. And she's already at that range before it's even light. 3 things on this list are going to stop you cold. Number 22 cost 3 farthings in 1952 and fed 1 in 4 British children every single morning. Number 11, factory doctors in Birmingham wrote it down by name as the breakfast eaten by men who never took a sick day. And number 1, the breakfast on more British working-class tables than any other in the 1950s. Your generation remembers it. The one after yours has never heard of it. These are 25 forgotten British poor man's breakfasts from the 1950s. And if your mum or your nan was that woman at that range, this one is for her. Number 25. Bread and dripping. Close your eyes for a moment. You're 8 years old. It's winter. The kitchen smells of coal smoke and something savoury and deep. On the table, 2 thick slices of white bread, spread not with butter, but with the dripping from the tin by the range. The tin that collected the fat off every roast, every rasher, every bit of meat the family had eaten that week, spread thick, salted. Sometimes with the dark jelly from the bottom of the tin, the richest, most flavoursome part, spread underneath the white fat on top. Bread and dripping in 1952 cost a farthing per slice. It was the breakfast of half of working-class Britain, and nobody called it poverty food. In those kitchens, it was just breakfast. The saturated fat panic of the late 1970s and 1980s finished it. Butter replaced dripping in the kitchens that could afford it. Margarine replaced it in the ones that couldn't. And the tin by the range disappeared from British kitchens so completely that most people under 50 have never seen one. But bread and dripping was just the beginning. What came next in those kitchens was where real ingenuity started. Number 24. Porridge with salt. Not sweet. Not with golden syrup, not with jam or honey. Salt. Just salt. A pinch in the water before the oats went in. And maybe, if it was a good week, a little cold milk poured around the edge of the bowl when it was served. Rolled oats from a paper bag, Quaker or the Co-op own brand, stirred slowly in a pan of water on the range for 15 minutes. 15. And you didn't stop stirring because if you stopped, it caught on the bottom and then the whole pan tasted burnt. Your nan knew that. She'd learned it the hard way. A £2 bag of oats in 1954 cost around 5pence and fed a family of 5 for 4 mornings. That's a penny per family breakfast. A penny was everything. Instant porridge sachets arrived in the 1960s, and the 15-minute stir became a 2-minute pour. Quicker, blander, more expensive per portion. And something about the texture, that particular thickness, that slight resistance under the spoon, was never replicated. Next up, number 23. Fried bread. If you think salted porridge sounds plain, wait until you hear what number 23 tasted like on a cold January morning in a house with no central heating. Number 23. Fried bread. Not toast, not bread under the grill. Bread put into a pan of hot fat, bacon fat, dripping, lard, and fried until both sides were golden and crisp on the outside. Fried bread on its own, on a plate, with a mug of tea. That was breakfast for tens of thousands of families on the days when there were no eggs, no bacon. Just the bread, the fat, and the tea. The sound of it in the pan. That sizzle when the bread hit the hot fat. You heard it from the top of the stairs and you knew what was coming, and you came down faster. That sound is gone now. Lard fell out of favour in the 1970s. The pan that lived permanently on the range with its coating of fat ready to go, replaced by non-stick pans that got washed every time. Fried bread became rare. We're still only at number 23, and the further down this list we go, the more remarkable these breakfasts become. Number 22. Oatmeal gruel. This is the one. 3 farthings per portion in 1952. An estimated 1 in 4 British school children ate this before school every single morning in the early 1950s. Most didn't know it had a name. Oatmeal. Coarser than rolled oats. Boiled in a large amount of water until it was thin enough to drink rather than eat with a spoon. Thinner than porridge. Almost like a warm, slightly cloudy liquid. Served in a cup or a bowl. Sometimes with a spoon of treacle stirred through if the tin wasn't empty, sometimes with nothing at all. It sounds like nothing, and by any standard of abundance, it was close to nothing. But in the post-war years of 1950 and 1951, when rationing was still in force and butter was still on the ration book, a cup of warm oatmeal gruel at 7 in the morning was something. It was hot. It was filling. It asked almost nothing of the housekeeping money, and it was made with love by women who would have given their children more if more had been available. Number 21. Bacon, bits and bread. Not a rasher of bacon. Bacon bits, the offcuts, the scraps, the pieces that fell off the slicer at the butcher's counter and got sold for considerably less. In the butchers of Manchester and Leeds, they cost around 2pence. Your nan knew which butchers had the best bits. She had a route. Monday was one butcher for the pieces. Friday was another for the bone. This knowledge was as important as any recipe she knew. The bits went into a pan and fried until they crisped up and the fat ran, and then the bread went in alongside to soak up every drop. Everything used, nothing wasted. The pan cleaned with the bread. Supermarkets standardized meat in the 1960s. Butchers with their loose offcuts became rarer. Bacon bits disappeared, and with them went the knowledge of how to use them and the route your nan walked on a Monday morning. But what happened next in those kitchens, especially mid-week when the bacon bits were gone, is where this list gets genuinely creative. Number 20. Bread and condensed milk. The yellow tin. Nestle. The one with the red label and the small key soldered to the bottom that you used to roll back the lid. If you're over 60, you can picture that tin right now without trying. A thick slice of white bread. Condensed milk spooned directly from the tin. Thick, sweet. Spread across the bread with the back of the spoon and eaten immediately. Sometimes 2 slices, sometimes 1. A tin in 1955 cost around 8pence. It lasted a family of 5, roughly 4 breakfasts if she was careful. 2pence per family breakfast. It got children out of the door fed. The sweetness of it. That specific caramel-like sweetness. That taste is one of the most specific sensory memories of post-war working-class childhood. Ask anyone over 70. Watch their face change. Condensed milk is still available. The tin still exists, but the habit of putting it on breakfast bread vanished with the generation that needed to. Number 19. Dripping toast soldiers. Soldiers. White bread cut into strips, toasted under the grill until just golden, then spread while still hot with dripping. Eaten standing up at the kitchen table because there wasn't time to sit, and there was never quite room. The soldier format was not whimsy. It was practical. Strips of toast were easier for small children to hold and eat quickly. They could be carried to the front door, eaten on the walk if the morning was running late. Toast soldiers in 1956 cost almost nothing. Fast to make. 2 minutes under the grill, 30 seconds to cut and spread. Done. In a kitchen where 5 people needed feeding before 7:30, those minutes mattered. The dripping went. The soldiers stayed, but they became something you only made with an egg. The working breakfast version, fast, fatty, disappeared. We're at number 19, and the surprises are just beginning. Number 18. Oatmeal and treacle. Thick, rolled oats cooked until they were dense. Denser than normal porridge, almost stiff enough to hold a shape in the bowl, with a generous spoonful of black treacle stirred through at the last moment. So it ran in dark ribbons through the pale grey oatmeal rather than blending in completely. Black treacle, not golden syrup treacle. Darker, more bitter, with a depth of flavour that golden syrup doesn't have and never will. Lyle's, in the black tin with the gold writing. A tin cost around 5pence in 1957 and lasted several weeks because you only used a spoonful at a time. Per serving, the treacle cost less than a farthing. But what black treacle provided nutritionally was remarkable. It's exceptionally high in iron. A single tablespoon contains more iron than a portion of red meat. In the post-war years, when meat was still rationed and anemia was a genuine public health concern in working-class communities, black treacle stirred into oatmeal was unknowingly providing something the family needed. Nobody in that kitchen knew about iron content in 1953. They knew that the children seemed better on the mornings when the treacle went in, so the treacle went in. Golden syrup replaced black treacle in most kitchens by the 1960s because it was milder and children accepted it more easily. And a significant and unacknowledged source of iron quietly disappeared from the British working-class diet, without anyone noticing or commenting. Number 17, fried leftover potato. Not bubble and squeak. Not the organised version with cabbage and seasoning and technique. Just last night's boiled potatoes, cold from the pantry, sliced roughly, put in the dripping pan and fried until the outside crisped up and the inside stayed soft. And the whole kitchen smelled of hot fat and potato starch catching slightly at the edges. Eaten on a plate with salt, sometimes with a fried egg if there were eggs, sometimes with nothing else because there was nothing else. Just the potato on the plate and the tea in the cup and the day beginning. In the working-class kitchens of Leeds and Bradford and Sheffield in the early 1950s, deliberately boiling extra potatoes the night before so there were enough left for the morning's fry was standard practice. It was built into the cooking. You didn't boil for the evening's meal alone, you boiled for tomorrow's breakfast too. That level of planning, built invisibly into the daily cooking routine, has completely disappeared from most modern households. The potato was a penny a pound at the market in 1954. Leftover boiled potato cost nothing because the cost was already spent the night before. The frying fat was already in the pan. This breakfast was, in effect, free. And it was hot and filling, and it asked nothing of the housekeeping money on a Thursday morning when the week was running thin. We're at number 17, and stop for a moment. Because what connects everything on this list so far is something worth understanding before we go further. Every single breakfast on this list was built on the same three things: fat, slow-burning carbohydrate, heat. Not because anyone in those kitchens understood nutrition. Not because they'd read anything about energy release or metabolic function, but because those women had watched what happened when their husbands and children went out without enough fat in them, and what happened when they didn't. They'd adjusted. They'd refined. Over years and decades, through trial and the particular error of a man coming home on his knees at 5 o'clock, they'd arrived at the same answer every time. Fat, slow carbohydrate, heat, dripping on bread, oats with treacle, fried potato, cold rice. The same formula, expressed differently every morning, depending on what was in the pantry. And here is what makes the next items on this list extraordinary. A thick, firm block of grey oatmeal that held its shape when the pan was tipped. Made in the evening, left in the pan overnight. By morning it had set solid. A thick, firm block of grey oatmeal that held its shape when the pan was tipped. Cut into slices like a loaf. Fried in the dripping pan until golden on both sides. Fried cold porridge? It sounds wrong. It isn't wrong. When oatmeal sets overnight and is fried, the outside crisps up and the inside stays dense and slightly chewy. That made the bread taste like something substantial, that sent you out of the door feeling like you'd eaten. In the Scottish mining communities that had moved south to the Yorkshire and Nottinghamshire coalfields in the 1930s and 1940s, this was called a porridge scone. Though it wasn't a scone in any conventional sense. It was simply yesterday's porridge, fried. And it travelled south with those families and appeared in Yorkshire kitchens throughout the 1950s. A portion cost nothing beyond the original cost of the oats, already accounted for. And the sliver of dripping needed to fry it, and it was made from something that would otherwise have been wasted. In a kitchen governed by the absolute rule of waste nothing, cold fried porridge was not a compromise. It was a solution. Bovril, the dark glass jar with the gold label, or Marmite, the round pot, the yellow lid, or Marmite, the round pot, the yellow lid. Either way, the principle was the same. A thin scraping of intensely savoury, salty, dark extract, spread across white bread with no butter underneath because the extract provided enough flavour on its own. And butter was an unnecessary expense on a morning when the jar was already doing the work. Bread and Bovril in 1955. A jar of Bovril cost around 8p and lasted a family several weeks because you used so little at a time. Per portion, it was almost unmeasurably cheap. And it provided something that most other items on this list didn't. A powerful hit of salt and savoury depth. The advertising was aimed directly at working-class housewives and made specific claims about strength and energy. Concentrated into a dark paste. The advertising was aimed directly at working-class housewives, and belief, in a cold kitchen at 7 in the morning, is worth something. Number 14. Fried egg on bread without a plate. This needs explaining. Not fried egg on toast, not fried egg served on a plate with bread on the side. A fried egg lifted directly from the pan and placed onto a slice of white bread held in the hand. Folded over immediately so the yolk was contained inside the bread and eaten standing at the kitchen counter. Because the table was already cleared and the day had officially started. The bread hand method. It had no name in those kitchens. It was just how you ate a fried egg when you were in a hurry. The bread hand method. It had no name in those kitchens. It was just how you ate a fried egg when you were in a hurry. Eggs in 1956 were still coming off rationing. The egg ration had only ended in 1953. A dozen eggs cost around 2 and 3 pence in 1956. 1 egg per person per morning was an aspiration. On the mornings when there was 1 egg and 3 children, your nan would fry it, put it in the bread, cut the bread in half and call it enough for 2. And somehow it was. The standing breakfast, the eat-it-on-your-feet breakfast, that specific working-class morning ritual has disappeared. The standing breakfast, the eat-it-on-your-feet breakfast, that specific working-class morning ritual has disappeared. Number 13. Oaten water cake, baked the night before, flat, round, about the size of a side plate, made from oatmeal, a pinch of salt, a little lard, and just enough water to bring it together. No raising agent, no egg, nothing else. Pressed flat by hand onto a baking sheet and put in the range oven the previous evening while it was still hot from dinner. Out, left on the rack overnight. By morning it was completely cold and quite hard. Left on the rack overnight. By morning it was completely cold and quite hard. The mill towns, Oldham, Rochdale, Bury, Accrington. The oat cake in this form was most common in Lancashire and Yorkshire, particularly in households with connections to the textile trades. The bread hand method. It had no name in those kitchens. It was just how you ate a fried egg when you were in a hurry. That required nothing in the morning. No pan, no heat, no time, just something already made. Women who worked early shifts or whose husbands did had learned to bake something the night before. 2 minutes might not sound like anything. In those kitchens, it was everything. Number 12. Bread and jam, the serious version. Not the way you eat bread and jam today. White bread, thick cut, spread first with a thin layer of margarine. Not butter, margarine, because butter was 3 pence more a pound and 3 pence was a decision. And then jam applied in a quantity that today would be considered excessive, but in 1953 was simply what bread and jam meant. Strawberry jam, raspberry jam, Robertson's or the Co-op own brand or the jam your nan made in September without anyone noticing or commenting. That's under 3 pence per family per morning. That's under 3 pence per family per morning. The jam provided sugar, fast energy, the kind that got a child through the walk to school and the first lesson, before hunger set in again around 10. The bread provided slow carbohydrate, the margarine provided fat, archival shot of a family sitting in silence focused on eating. The importance of it as the main meal of the morning rather than a supplement. That is gone. The single most common breakfast among men who had the lowest rates of sick days across the manufacturing plants. That comes at number 11. Thick oatmeal porridge, the factory version. This is the one the factory doctors in Birmingham recorded in their occupational health surveys of the mid-1950s. The single most common breakfast among men who had the lowest rates of sick days across the manufacturing plants. Just porridge, but made thick, much thicker than normal. Oatmeal cooked in barely enough water to cover it. Just porridge, but made thick, much thicker than normal. Oatmeal cooked in barely enough water to cover it. Eaten with a fork, salted. Sometimes with a spoonful of lard worked through it while it was still hot. Eaten with a fork, salted. Sometimes with a spoonful of lard worked through it while it was still hot. And then jam applied in a quantity that today would be considered excessive, but in 1953 was simply what it meant. The reason it appears in those records is that the doctors noticed the correlation. Men who ate this consistently outperformed those who didn't in terms of sustained physical output across a 10-hour shift. Those records exist in the Birmingham City Archive. The breakfast they describe has been completely forgotten by everyone except the men who ate it and the wives who made it. Number 10. Cold rice pudding. Made in the evening, left overnight, eaten cold from the dish in the morning before anyone was properly awake. The skin on a cold rice pudding, that particular texture, the way it gives slightly when you press it. The skin on a cold rice pudding, that particular texture, the way it gives slightly when you press it. You don't remember it, you feel it. And if you grew up eating cold rice pudding from a dish on a winter morning in the 1950s, that sensation is somewhere in you right now. Pudding rice cost around 3p per pound in 1956. Full cream milk from the doorstep delivery was 4p halfpenny a pint. A large baking dish of rice pudding used roughly a pint and a half of milk and a quarter pound of rice. A large baking dish of rice pudding used roughly a pint and a half of milk and a quarter pound of rice. The range oven did the work in the evening while it was already lit for dinner. The range oven did the work in the evening while it was already lit for dinner. You don't remember it, you feel it. It vanished because the range went. The range went because council houses got gas cookers in the late 1950s. And nobody left a dish of rice pudding in a gas oven overnight because the gas cost money every hour it was on. And if you grew up eating cold rice pudding from a dish on a winter morning in the 1950s, and then it stopped, the era was over. Number 9, Pobs. If you know this word, you are almost certainly over 65 and from the north of England. If you don't know it, Pobs were bread broken into small pieces in a bowl, covered with warm milk, a little sugar stirred through and eaten with a spoon. That's it, that was Pobs. In Lancashire and Yorkshire throughout the 1950s, Pobs were a breakfast food, an invalid food and a late-night comfort food. You gave it to children too young for solid food. You gave it to adults who were ill. And you gave it to children on winter mornings when something warm was needed. A bowl of Pobs in 1954 cost perhaps a halfpenny. Bread that was going stale broke down perfectly in warm milk and became something soft and filling. Nothing wasted. The word Pobs has almost entirely disappeared. The dish has disappeared with it. A whole vocabulary of food knowledge has gone through the slow erosion of the people who spoke it. Number 8, toast and beef dripping with Worcestershire sauce. 2 slices of white bread under the grill, turned once. 2 slices of white bread under the grill, turned once. Spread while still hot with a generous layer of beef dripping, and then 3 drops of sauce shaken across the top. While the dripping was still soft enough to absorb it. You wanted the fat and the umami and the slight tang of the vinegar hitting the salt of the dripping. A bottle of Lear and Perrins in 1957 cost around 10p. It lasted months because you used so little. The dripping was essentially free. This was one of the most flavoursome breakfasts, and it cost less than 2p. The combination of beef dripping and Worcestershire sauce is almost unheard of now. The dripping went in the 1980s. The sauce stayed, but lost its context. The specific knowledge of putting those two things together at 7 in the morning. That knowledge is gone. Number 7, fried bread and black pudding. Black pudding, not the thin, pale discs you find today. The proper kind, a thick, dark, densely packed cylinder from the butcher, sliced into rounds half an inch thick, put into the fat pan beside the fried bread, and cooked until both sides had a slight crust, and the inside was still moist, and the fat had run out of it into the bread frying alongside. Black pudding in the 1950s was a butcher's product. Bury in Lancashire was the black pudding capital. In 1955, a pound cost 10p, a tuppenny breakfast of extraordinary substance and flavour. The iron content of black pudding, made from pig's blood, is among the highest. In post-war Britain, iron deficiency was common. A regular black pudding breakfast was, unknowingly, addressing a genuine nutritional need. It didn't vanish entirely, but it became a full English component, a treat, a weekend thing, a restaurant item. It stopped being the everyday working breakfast of ordinary families on a Tuesday morning and lost the thing that made it important. Number 6, dripping cake, yesterday's slice, made usually on a Saturday when there was a little more time. Flour, lard, dripping, a handful of currants, a pinch of mixed spice, a little sugar. Baked in a flat tin until it was pale gold on top and dense all the way through. Left on the rack. Eaten across the following week. A slice for breakfast on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday until it was gone. By Monday, it was a day old. By Wednesday, it was 3 days old. It was harder, drier, denser. It went on the breakfast table alongside the tea as simply the thing that was there. The baked thing that required nothing further. A dripping cake in 1956 cost around 4p to make. It lasted 5 breakfasts, less than a penny per breakfast. And because the currants provided iron and the fat provided calories, it did everything a breakfast needed for the price of nothing. The dripping went. The weekend baking habit went with it. The strict economy of the dripping cake became unnecessary. And when the necessity went, the cake went with it. We are at number 6. The next item is one I suspect many remember. Number 5. Bread and warm milk. Not Pobs, this is different. A thick slice of white bread on a plate. A cup of milk heated in a small pan until it was steaming, but not boiling, because she knew the difference. Poured over the bread slowly, so it soaked in, but the bread didn't completely disintegrate. A little sugar, eaten with a spoon while still warm. This was the breakfast of the very young and the very old. The children too young for proper solids, but old enough for the table. The grandparent whose teeth had given up and for whom significant chewing was a problem. And on the mornings when someone was unwell, a chest cold, a stomach upset, in houses without central heating, bread and warm milk was what appeared on the breakfast tray. It was also, in the households where money was most stretched, simply breakfast on the mornings when there was bread and milk and nothing else. And no money to change that before Friday. A pint of milk on the doorstep in 1955 cost fourpence halfpenny. A slice of bread cost a halfpenny. Bread and warm milk for one person cost fivepence. For a child, the portions were smaller. On the worst weeks of the worst months of the post-war years, this was what there was. Number 4. Oatmeal and condensed milk. Not porridge, oatmeal. Raw, uncooked, or very lightly toasted in a dry pan. Very lightly toasted in a dry pan for 30 seconds to bring out the nuttiness. Mixed directly with condensed milk in a bowl until it formed a thick, sweet, dense paste. Eaten cold, eaten quickly, eaten without ceremony. This sounds strange. In the context of the 1950s north of England, it was completely normal in certain communities, particularly in the former mill towns where Scottish workers had settled and brought their food habits with them. Raw oatmeal absorbs liquids slowly. Mixed with condensed milk the night before and left in the cold, it swelled into something dense and filling. In the morning, you added a splash more condensed milk to loosen it and ate it cold. No cooking, no heat, no pan, no time. For a household where both parents were on early shifts and the oldest child was responsible for feeding the younger ones before school, it was a logistical solution. It meant the children ate before school, regardless of whether any adult was there to cook for them. That context, the specific working conditions that made this breakfast logical, has disappeared. And without the context, the breakfast seems like nothing. With it, it seems like everything. Number 3. Scraps of toast and dripping. The children's version. The toast that was too burnt for the adults. The heel of the bread that nobody wanted. The last scraping from the dripping tin. The dark jelly from the very bottom, the most flavoursome part. Put on a plate. Put in front of the youngest children at the breakfast table. Not as an insult. Not as a lesser portion. Simply because the small children didn't notice that the toast was darker than it should have been. They ate it and were fed, and that was the entire point. In the early 1950s, the breakfast table operated on an unspoken hierarchy. The husband got the best because he needed the most calories for the physical day. The older children got the next best because they too had long days. And the youngest children and the mother herself got what was left. She ate last. She always ate last. She ate standing up while she washed the pan. She ate the burnt bits and the last scraping and the heel of the bread. And she called it enough and sent them all out of the door and then started the rest of the day. That specific, silent, daily act of self-deprivation, performed millions of times, was never recorded. It was just what you did. And the burnt toast and the last dripping scraping carry that weight now, if you know what they mean. Number 2. Leftover suet pudding. Fried. Saturday night's suet pudding sitting in the basin overnight, sliced cold on a Sunday morning. Put in the dripping pan, and fried until both sides were golden and the sweat had crisped slightly at the edges. And the inside was warm and dense and faintly sweet from whatever had been in the original pudding. Leftover plain sweet pudding, fried. The variety didn't matter. The principle was the same. Yesterday's pudding becomes today's breakfast, costs nothing beyond what was already spent, wastes nothing. Leftover jam roly-poly, fried. Leftover spotted dick, fried. Leftover plain sweet pudding, fried. The variety didn't matter, and provides a hot and genuinely satisfying start to a Sunday morning that costs the housekeeping budget precisely 0 additional pence. In the back-to-back houses of Leeds and the terrace streets of Salford in the early 1950s, Sunday breakfast was often this: fried leftover pudding with a mug of strong tea, because the Sunday roast wasn't until midday and something was needed to fill the gap. Suit pudding as a regular weekly food disappeared by the late 1960s as electric cookers made the long steaming process less practical. And when the Saturday night pudding stopped being made, the Sunday morning fried version went with it, connected by the logic of waste nothing. Number 1. Porridge bread. This is the one. The breakfast eaten by more British working-class families in the 1950s than any other on this list. And almost nobody has heard of it. Porridge bread was not a recipe anyone wrote down. It was not something that appeared in cookery books. Porridge bread was not a recipe anyone wrote down. It was not something that appeared in cookery books. It lived only in the practice of women who made it, passed between neighbours over the backyard wall, learned from a mother-in-law in a Durham mining village. Here is what it was. The previous evening's leftover porridge, because she always made slightly more than was needed, was mixed the next morning, with a little plain flour, a pinch of salt, and just enough water to bring it together into a thick, slightly sticky dough. Pressed flat in a pan, no rolling pin needed, just the heel of the hand, and fried in the dripping pan on both sides, until it was golden and slightly firm on the outside, and still soft in the middle. Served hot, directly from the pan onto the plate, with dripping if there was dripping, with treacle if there was treacle, with nothing on the mornings when there was nothing, and it was still enough. The cost was immeasurable because it used what was already there. Leftover porridge, a spoonful of flour, the fat already in the pan. This breakfast cost the housekeeping money nothing beyond what had already been spent. It was created entirely from what remained. That is the system, not individual dishes. A system of feeding people on almost nothing, built by women who never called it a system, who never called it anything at all, who just got up before it was light and made sure everyone ate before they left the house. Porridge bread is gone, not because the recipe was lost. It was never properly written down to be lost. Gone because the conditions that created it are gone. The leftover porridge, the dripping pan, the range that was already warm, the absolute refusal to waste a single thing. The woman who got up first and ate last and held the whole thing together. She was the breakfast. All 25 of them. She was every single one. If your mother or your nan fed your family from a kitchen like that, leave her name in the comments. She deserves to be remembered.